From our lens in May 2020, 2019 is worlds away. A different time at a different place. It may well be remembered as the end of the old normal. Among the key coordinated policy responses by global central banks to COVID-19 was the injection of massive amounts of liquidity into the international financial markets. I'm not sure we fully appreciate that magnitude. So to achieve this, central banks expanded their balance sheets massively. For example, you look at the case of the US Federal Reserve, the most important of the central banks. It had increased its balance sheet from 870 billion in August 2007 to just over 7 trillion on May 19, 2020. That is a humongous increase. Predictably, this led to a substantial downward spiral of what is called the yield curve for financial assets. The resulting reduction in financing costs as a result of this reduction of the yield curve extended what is called a risk-on disposition among investors, which is to say that it encouraged them to take risks they would not otherwise take, encouraging mergers, acquisitions, and expansion of capacity. To further sustain market euphoria, often unsupported by business fundamentals, some mainstream enterprises indulged in what are called financial engineering exercises by raising dividends, substantially increasing buybacks, stock buybacks, and the like. The process, as a consequence, also had some unintended consequences, like the following. First, a growing anxiety on the part of pension funds, life insurance companies, endowments, sovereign wealth funds, and the like, all of which need high current yields to meet their pension, insurance, and other claims of their stakeholders, of course. It also created an environment of near desperation from the point of these large institutional investors, similar to the kind of environment that existed when high yield bonds were developed, were invented. And this environment really encourages these investors to take risks that they would otherwise not take. Thirdly, there was a growing, as a consequence, divergence between market valuations, distorted by the weight of liquidity, and sound economic fundamentals. As a consequence, global markets were on a tear. You had a fair amount of, with market valuations rising rapidly and dramatically, with a fair amount of demand focused on the technology sector, in particular e-commerce, blockchain related, and so forth. And companies reflecting disruptive new business models like Tesla, Uber, Airbnb, Amazon, Alibaba, and the like. However, dark clouds were emerging in the geopolitical and economic environment. The rise of populism in the US and Europe, increasing trade tensions between the US and China, a dramatic US retreat from globalization, the globalization it had long championed, a similar US retreat from multilateralism, a weakening of the Western alliances like NATO, World Trade Organization, etc. Increased tensions in the Korean Peninsula, the South China Sea, and the Persian Gulf. Similarly, ominous fissures between OPEC and its partners began to show. In response to a looming COVID-19 crisis and the prospect of drastically reduced demand, Saudi Arabia advocated deep production cuts to support crude prices. Unconvinced of the destructive power of COVID-19 and fearing that output reductions would simply provide a lifeline to struggling and distressed US shale oil companies. These were the companies whose growth had turned the US into the world's largest oil producer. Russia did not agree to the proposed output cuts. The result, an unprecedented collapse of crude oil prices. More than half in the case of Brent crude to $23 a barrel in March, and West Texas Intermediate crashing to negative territory in May. And that was at negative $37.63 a barrel for the first time on record. And this was so because rising stockpiles began to threaten to overwhelm storage capacity. Moving now to the Philippines. Despite sluggish growth prior to the turn of the 21st century, the Philippines has had a good run over the last 20 years, with average annual growth between 2001 and 2009 of 4.6% per annum, and rising to 6.4% from 2010 to 2019. In addition, inward remittances from its large OFW base were robust, and the country's household debt remains among the lowest in Asia. Finally, the country benefits from a favorable demography with a young and growing workforce. All these move the country from a classification of lower middle income nation with a gross national income per capita of $3,830 in 2018. It is now projected to reach $3,400 by the end of 2020, $3,700 in 2021, and $4,000 in 2022. These reflect expected consequences of COVID-19. Following the trauma of previous crises, the Philippines benefited from its efforts to get its economic house in order. NEDA indicates that we closed 2019 with a national government debt to GDP ratio of 39.6%, far below the US's 127%, the European Union 79.3%, Japan's 238%, and Germany's 59.8%. Compared to the ASEAN 5, our leverage is above Indonesia's of 29.8%, but below Singapore's 126%, Thailand's 41.8%, and Malaysia's 51.8%, and Vietnam's 57.5%. The country's vulnerabilities in order of importance, on the other hand, are first, inequity, low investment rates, both domestic and foreign, inadequate infrastructure, a narrow industrial base, and a sluggish agricultural sector. All of that backdrop, and then COVID-19 happens. COVID-19 was the black swan. The country's economic pillars were hit hard. Services, BPO, tourism, industry, and OFW remittances. Fortunately, the prudent fiscal and monetary policies of the past provided the country fiscal space to borrow and finance the extraordinary need to protect the vulnerable, save jobs, and stimulate an economic recovery. NEDA projects the following: a contraction of GDP ranging from 2 to 4% in 2020, and with a consensus estimate ranging from -2% to a high of 4.8%. Second, a fiscal deficit rising from 3.4% to 5.3% in 2020. Thirdly, a debt to GDP ratio rising from 39.6% to 49.8% by the end of 2020. And an unemployment, on the other hand, rising from 5.3% in January to 10.2% by the end of the second quarter 2020. And we have since heard of the latest unemployment numbers. Against this backdrop, we have witnessed the largest coordinated monetary and fiscal response in living memory. The monetary response to ensure sufficient liquidity in the system included a 1.25% policy rate cut, a 2% reduction in the bank reserve requirements, regulatory relief, open market operations, and the purchase of 300 billion pesos of government bonds. On the fiscal side, the Department of Finance announced its four-pillar socio-economic strategy, amounting to $29.3 billion, or 8% of GDP. This will rise by a still undetermined amount depending on the scale of the economic recovery. Its aim, this four-pillar program, is to provide first emergency support for the vulnerable, about $11.6 billion. Expanded medical resources, $1.1 billion. And fiscal and monetary action to support the economy, $16.6 billion. Moving from there to ICD. Our CEO will report on ICD's 2019 operations in detail. Let me add, in addition to its many domestic activities, that your institute has continued to be active regionally and internationally. Among others, ICD was represented at the ASEAN Capital Markets Corporate Governance Experts Forum in Bangkok with our own SEC and those of our leading ASEAN partner countries. Second, we attended the ADB's FinTech Forum, the Global Network of Directors Institutes Conference in Canada, the Ecosperity Conference on Stewardship Asia in the Roundtable in Singapore, the National Association of Corporate Directors Summit held in the United States, the OECD Roundtable on Corporate Governance in India, the Enterprise Risk Management Annual Summit held in Indonesia. I mention this because it is important to broaden, in my opinion, and deepen our regional and international network, both to share our knowledge and to learn from our counterpart institutes and global corporate governance thought leaders. Let us now reflect on the lessons learned. COVID-19 is and has been a traumatic watershed moment. It revealed modern, materialistic, and supremely self-confident society confronted with its fundamental vulnerabilities and contradictions. The following transcendental realities have, in my opinion, become apparent. First, the world, society, communities, and individuals are interdependent. Second, there can be no harmony, stability, and peace where gross inequities exist. Thirdly, despite the lessons of human history, men, communities, societies, and nations appear incapable or unwilling to understand the imperative of living and working together in peace. Fourthly, a zero-sum game approach to geopolitics, business, social, or individual relationships ultimately tends to result in a lose-lose outcome. Fifthly, national development is too important to leave to the public sector. It requires the active engagement of educational institutions, the private sector, civil society, and the family as integral and equal partners. Similarly, governance of business and enterprise is too important to leave to its shareholders alone. Too many lives depend on enterprise. The ultimate burden of stewardship falls on their boards of directors. Seventhly, the common good, the end goal of good governance, is difficult to realize because it requires individuals to subordinate their interests to that of others. The country's lopsided economic structure has resulted in the development of two distinct, rapidly diverging communities and subcultures: a small, privileged elite and the majority. The new normal must address many existing social inequities. For example, the vast disparity between highest paid corporate leaders and their lowest paid employees. Secondly, how business leaders, sports, and show business personalities are compensated relative to teachers, healthcare workers, farmers, soldiers, critical service providers, and so forth. Thirdly, the manner in which the fruits of enterprise are distributed among its stakeholders. Fourthly, poverty in the face of robust aggregate economic growth. Fifthly, the proliferation of dense, impoverished, and unhealthy urban slums, while the privileged thrive, with some callously even indulging in conspicuous consumption. The way forward. In my opinion, ICD must begin with an unequivocal vision predicated on enterprise existing for the maximization of long-term stakeholder value. Secondly, a clear understanding by corporations, for-profits and not-for-profits, of the distinct roles of the boards of directors or trustees and the managements. Thirdly, boards of directors and trustees are accountable for governance, and therefore, as a consequence, are the stewards of enterprise. Accordingly, they are accountable for the articulation and dissemination of the corporate vision, mission, and objectives of an enterprise, the approval of policy, strategy, business plans, and budgets, and of management oversight. Management, on the other hand, is accountable for execution, which is to say, proposing policy, strategy, and translating the latter into business, financing plans and budgets. Upon approval, management is responsible for implementation of those strategies and plans. Thirdly, management is in charge and responsible for the day-to-day administration of all aspects of the enterprise. Fifthly, business is a noble vocation and an important partner, development partner, when properly governed and managed. ICD is in the business of promoting the highest standards of corporate governance and stewardship in Philippine enterprise. Stewardship and long-term stakeholder value should be at the heart of ICD's initiatives. The former places enterprise as an important partner in national development. The latter reflects the sustainability of enterprise, ESG, as key pillars of sustainability, as is well understood. In the immediate future and inspired by the vision, we heal as one, ICD should be an effective partner in the rehabilitation of Philippine private enterprise. It should be an active and dynamic partner of government in ensuring that all its programs faithfully reflect that vision. It should develop content relevant and critical to enterprise boards and managements at this time. For example, crisis management, risk management, data analytics, e-commerce, rebuilding supply chains, and so forth. It should develop and enhance alternative and primarily e-based program delivery systems. It should actively develop blended, i.e. combined virtual and face-to-face program delivery platforms. It should partner with academia in incorporating the vision into the management and leadership training programs of the latter. It should offer services and experiences of its senior fellows and members to mentor family-owned and privately held enterprises. It should develop and execute capacity-building programs for government-owned financial institutions, their account management staff and clients, to ensure that the large pool of funds disbursed to the micro, small, and medium enterprises are used properly and effectively. And it should continue to cultivate our regional and international partners, walking the talk on our belief in and commitment to international collaboration. Dear fellows and members, beloved members, my tenure as trustee and chairman expires this year. I wish to extend my deep appreciation to Dr. Jess Stanislao, our founder and chairman emeritus, the many capable and deeply committed trustees, chief executive officers, and our hardworking, idealistic, and inspiring management and staff, with whom I have had the privilege of serving. I leave in difficult circumstances, but fully confident that the board, the management, and staff of your institute are more than able to rise up to this, yet another challenge. I am not leaving ICD or the advocacy we are all deeply committed to. God permitting, I hope to remain engaged for as long as I can contribute. God bless us all. Thank you.